Welcome to MCC Moment. Our MCC Moment's a little bit different this week because we're going to take the time to explore some of the issues that we are experiencing and that our community around us is experiencing in relation to a very, very natural high level of stress and anxiety about our current and our future circumstances. A recent ABC News report spoke about the potential of us moving out of lockdown and experiencing what is known as culture shock. Now, culture shock is a phenomenon that's known when people move from one culture to another. So a couple of examples of this are for anyone who's been on the mission fields or lived in another country with a very different culture, coming back to their home country, in our case Australia, can cause this phenomenon of culture shock, which is a feeling of stress and a process that we need to go through to reintegrate into our own culture. And even for myself, I know that having lived in another country many years ago for a year that had a very similar culture to our own culture here in Australia, I still experience that phenomenon of having some difficulty reintegrating back into my own home culture. So the suggestion in this news report is that as we move out of what has been relative lockdown and perhaps a relative security for some of being in their own homes and knowing that there is safety there, and as we begin to reintegrate into a community that is very, very different and in which we mightn't feel totally safe, then it's quite possible that we might experience that feeling of culture shock and all the things that come with that. We are going to need to reintegrate into a culture which has changed. So it's not like being away somewhere and coming back to a home culture, which we know and are familiar with. In this case, we're moving out into a culture which has changed, into a community which has changed, and into a lifestyle which has changed. So it's very, very normal and very natural for increased stress levels in that situation, and it's very normal for increased levels of anxieties. And you may find that yourself, or you may find that in people around you. So how do we deal with this? Well, there's a few ways that we can look at this. The first is this: take it slowly. When we're going through change, it's really important that we allow ourselves time and space to actually become aware of what we're processing, aware of how we're feeling, and to give ourselves time to adjust. We're human beings and we don't always adjust overnight, but we can do that with a little bit of time, a little bit of reflection, and recognising that what we're going through is completely normal. So allow yourself time to process what's going on and to process and adjust to the changes that we're all going to have to adjust to. There'll be a few things that you need to change. For all of us, there'll be habits that we need to change, and habits that we need to let go, and new habits that we need to form, and that's all part of the adjustments that we're going to have to make. So for some of us, our relationships have changed as well, because social distancing does have an impact, and it does have quite a significant emotional impact on families and friends. And it's important that we understand and recognise that we're going to feel that. It's very natural and normal to feel like you want to go and give someone a hug and you're not able to do that. So we need to recognise that, and we can recognise that that's a very normal reaction that we're going to have. So understanding that how we do feel is completely normal, and that the anxiety associated with that is completely normal, helps us to understand that it's not just us. It's everyone else who is going through the same thing. We hear so much about what is happening at the moment, but it's important that we take the time just to quiet ourselves and steady ourselves in the moment. We hear also how much more others are going through, and sometimes we can find strength in that, in recognising that we have, in some sense, in some ways, we have escaped something which could have been much worse for our nation, and in this we can be very grateful for. So when we feel that we're coming across someone who is suffering tremendous stress and anxiety, we can be a comfort to them simply by our presence and simply by being with them and recognising with them that, yep, you are feeling this, and yep, it is completely normal, but you will be okay. You're going to be okay, you're going to come through this. And that's the greatest reassurance that we all have. We will all be okay, we will all come through this. Sometimes it's helpful when we're feeling a heightened level of stress and anxiety, and many of you will know this, simply to turn our minds to something else. Now, for some people, turning our minds to something creative can be a great release, something that actually switches on the other side of the brain, the one that's not worrying, the one that's not anxious, the one that's not thinking too much, and allowing the other side that perhaps is a bit more creative to have prominence. And for some people, you may find that you're developing some new outlets. You might find you're developing some new creative skills, and this is actually a great time for that. For some, it's simply being outdoors, and whilst there are restrictions or have been restrictions on being outdoors, sometimes just sitting in our back garden, if you're able to do that. I've seen people simply sitting on their front porch, simply to be out in the open, and that gives a greater connection with what's going on outside. And sometimes that stillness of being amongst trees, birds, those areas like that, and just becoming aware of those can be very helpful to some people. For many, prayer is their comfort, of course, and slowing down and just reflecting on the stillness and the goodness of God is a comfort for many people. Having been a part-time chaplain for the last 10 years, when I've asked people that I have been visiting whether they pray, a surprising number of people have told me that they do. And they have told me that they pray whether or not they consider themselves to have a faith, whether they consider themselves to belong to any particular church, but the vast majority of people will tell me that they do pray. And that's because there's something in each one of us that knows that there is a God. And my experience is not unique. That's a common experience amongst chaplains that I have worked with. There is something in us that knows that there is a God, and something in us that will turn to God in times of distress or anxiety or stress. We know that there is a God we can turn to. And Psalm 46:10 says, "Be still and know that I am God." And the key words there are to be still, to slow down in the moment, know that there is a God, process what's happening, and you can talk to him about it because he is listening and he hears. And again, I have had so many people in the hospitals that I've worked in share that with me, that they have known that God has been there in that place. So as we begin to adjust to the new normal that's ahead of us, and as we begin to experience a very real and valid increased levels of stress and anxiety, we can know that we can support each other, and that is very important because we're all going through the same thing, and we can all turn and talk to God. So we know that we are not alone. We know that we're going to go through this adjustment together and that we will make it through the other side. I remember myself coming home from having lived overseas. It took me 3 months to settle. I don't believe it'll take us 3 months to adjust to the new normal that we have to adjust to here. So I think that we can take strength together. We can take strength as a community, and we will create something which is better, even though it's more difficult. We understand the reasons for it, and we understand that we are still there for each other, that no one will be left behind, and we can support each other and anyone else who we meet in the current and future circumstances. See you next time.